Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. With Russia's President Vladimir Putin paying a visit to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and now with French President Emmanuel Macron and German's Foreign Minister Johann Wadepoel visiting China, it's natural that we begin to ask ourselves about the implications not only of these meetings, but about the roles of India and China on the global economic and political stage. Does Europe need them more than it realizes? Joining me to take a look at this is Sana Hashmi, Fellow at the Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation. Hello, and thanks so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's first take a look at the Russia-India relations and the geopolitics coming out of that. What are the strategic gains of Vladimir Putin's recent visit to India and his meeting with Narendra Modi, especially given the current sanctions regime?
I won't say that there were substantial gains out of the visit. Of course, it got a lot of media attention, considerable media attention, but it wasn't just because of the dynamics between India and Russia, and then Putin was visiting India, but it was largely because of the US changing foreign policy priorities and how it has treated India this year. So, but if we just talk about the visit, Russian president visit to India, I won't really say that there was anything that was substantial. It was more symbolic than substantial. There was no agreement that came out of the visit. And there was a lot of speculation, specifically with respect to the arms deal, energy, nuclear cooperation, but nothing of that sort happened. But then if you look at the commentary that is coming out of the proponent of India-Russia accounts and commentary, they're saying that it was more about sending a signal to the United States that how the US and the West cannot treat India in a way that it has been treating. So in terms of substance, it wasn't really a significant visit. There wasn't really any milestone achievement that emerged out of it, but I think it was more symbolic than substantial. But then I feel that if we really have to look at the root cause of why this happened. In the past 4 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it didn't really happen. The annual summit between India and Russia, it happened only in December 2025. Why? Because of the eccentric and this unpredictable policies of Donald Trump administration. So I feel that we have to really look at why it happened, and now why is it happening is something that perhaps we have to pay less attention to.
Reports indicate that one of the aims of the visit was to address frozen Russian assets in Indian banks. I don't know whether you're able to confirm that. And what does this actually tell us about Moscow's financial strategies amid the international pressure?
I don't think that's true, but of course, the rationale behind his visit to India at this point of time was actually to ease economic pressure on Russia. And specifically now we are seeing that maybe Russia would move towards post-war construction. So I think it was primarily to gain more economic incentives, deals out of India, rather than unfreezing of any Russian asset or monetary benefits with respect to Russian asset, because I don't think that India is the place. And I think the expectations are kind of misplaced. We are looking at the wrong place when it comes to Russia-Ukraine war, when it comes to how and what role India is playing. I think the focus should be on China and not on India. And I would reiterate, the visit actually happened and only happened primarily because of the deterioration in India-US relation and the lack of trust that now India is witnessing within the West and with respect to the US primarily.
And what do you think that the Putin-Modi meeting signals to Trump and his position in this triangle, short-term and long-term?
I think the US isn't, of course, very happy about how India is rejuvenating this India-Russia partnership and how it is being in the US, as in, of course, absolutely not in a very positive light. But also US has to realize that what India is trying to portray right now is that India has options, and then India's strategic autonomy is something that India pays huge attention to, and this is not going anywhere. And what India wanted to portray and project is that India believes in multi-alignment. So I think strategic autonomy, multi-alignment are the key words that we have to really pay attention to with respect to India's policy within the Indo-Pacific, with respect to China, with respect to the United States, as well as Russia, and also when it comes to Europe. So I think the idea was primarily that India has options, India has alternatives. India's policy in the past 4 or 5 years was very pro-West, was very pro-Indo-Pacific, which still is. But right now, India's projection is that of strategic autonomy and multi-alignment are in place. And if the US is not really doing the course correction, is not mending the ways specifically with respect to tariff, then maybe there are ways that India would start looking at countries such as Russia or other countries that are not very well received within the Western circles.
Sure. Now I want to move on to China and the European visits there. So we had Emmanuel Macron and Johan Vadapula visiting. Do you see China primarily as a competitor to Europe, or is there still meaningful space for genuine strategic partnership and dialogue?
I don't really want to use the term strategic reliable partner or considerable cooperation with respect to China's cooperation with Europe. I think Europe is very divided and much more divided on China than ever before. There are a number of countries that are only looking at economic interest and not really seeing China as a threat. German foreign minister just said that the tariffs on China, sanctions on China should be the last resort. There's hardly any policy on the One China policy, on Taiwan, on China. So, of course, I feel that when you talk about countries such as India and the European countries, there are fragmented threat perception. In Europe, Russia is, of course, for obvious reasons, is a primary threat. But for countries within the region, China is a primary threat. So I feel that China is taking advantage of that factor and also the division between the US as well as Europe. And what it wants to do is just to regain the space that it had before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. So I feel it's just what it's trying to do is to take advantage of it, because I don't really see any tangible outcome or benefit that either France or Germany is going to get out of China. There have been negotiations with respect to chips, with respect to rare earth mineral, but then are we really going to get any deals out of it? I am highly doubtful. I'm not very optimistic about it. So I feel this is just, for China, this is just about dividing and ruling Europe, and Europe has to be very careful with respect to China's intentions and objectives.
Do you expect Europe to increasingly view China not only as a systemic rival, but perhaps as a potential partner? And under what conditions might such a nuanced dual approach be sustainable, keeping in mind the recent US national security strategy, which puts the US relations with Europe under several question marks?
I think the reason for deterioration in relation in cross-Atlantic cooperation is primarily the US, and I would not really say that China is a reason. China is just taking an advantage. China would remain a systemic rival. There's no doubt about that. The fundamental differences, human rights violation, economic differences, and even security differences are going to be there. As in, if you ask me, I would say that China is a primary enabler of the war that is happening right now in Europe. So I feel that perhaps on that aspect, Europe has to take its own stand. Europe has to have an independent foreign policy. What China is doing is just taking an advantage, and Europe is just because of the divided Europe and because of this lack of support from the US, it is just something that is not going to be beneficial in the long run. So I feel that Europe has to decide where it wants to see China and what approach it wants to have with respect to China. As in, German foreign minister, French president going to China and talking about cooperation, overlooking issues such as Taiwan as well as security cooperation, and more importantly, Russia, is something that doesn't really bide well for Europe in the long run. But I feel that perhaps we have to forget in the moment about the US, about the Indo-Pacific. I think what Europe needs to talk about and take into consideration is how it is going to be a united Europe and how it is going to devise a coherent policy with respect to Russia as well as China.
But do you think that that's even possible without taking into consideration China? Because do you think that there's any possibility of closer trade relations, perhaps, of the US and Russia as a means of separating perhaps Russia from China in the context of the things you said earlier?
I don't really think so. I feel that if Europe has to really be serious about Russia and the threat that Europe is very well versed with, they have to pay attention to what China has been doing. And I don't think that it is independent of Russia or anything that's happening right now. So I do believe that if they have to stop Russia, they have to stop China. One thing that I keep hearing from my conversation in Europe, that why do we care about China? You have to care about China, because without caring about China, I don't think there is any way that Russia could be stopped. As in, it has already achieved the status of a junior partner. And also, I don't think that, this visit to India got a lot of attention, but I feel what needs to get more attention is how, of course, we are talking about it, but we need to talk more about how this China-Russia partnership is proving to be very, very detrimental for the European interest. So I feel that we can't really see either of the issues in isolation. We have to talk about how Europe, I know that it's easier said than done, and of course, de-risking, decoupling, we have been talking about it since 2020, and then the economic dependence that China has inflicted on countries from Europe, from Asia, is actually a form of economic coercion. And this is why we are seeing the French president and German foreign minister are going and talking about their own economic interest. So I feel that how do we do it? And I think we are just stuck in a trap, and I don't really see a way out of it. But I think if we have to stop Russia, we also have to stop, and we have to see how do we control what China has been doing with respect to economic relationship. And I think the primary security threat actually comes from this China-Russia cooperation.
Sana Hashmi, thank you so much for all that insight. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's World Talks. Thanks so much for joining us on TVP World, and make sure that you stay tuned for much more that's coming up. Goodbye.